You tried it. You prayed the Philippians 4 prayer. You named the fear, you gave thanks, you handed it over. And for a moment, maybe a day, maybe a week, it worked. Then the same thoughts came back. The same chest tightness, the same 3 a.m. spiral. And now, there's a new layer on top of the anxiety, the frustration of someone who did everything right and still ended up back at square one. Here is what nobody told you. Philippians 4 is the emergency protocol. Romans 12:2 is the construction project. One stops the bleeding, the other rebuilds the wall. You need both, and most Christians only ever learn the first one. The Bible does not promise that praying through a panic attack will rewire 20 years of anxious thinking. What it promises is something slower, more structural, and, once you understand what it actually requires, far more achievable than you've been told. The word Paul uses in Romans 12:2 for renewing is the Greek word Anakinosis. It is present tense, continuous. It does not describe a moment, it describes a direction. Today we are getting into exactly what that direction requires, at the level of the brain and the soul simultaneously, and it is not what most people think. Let's go directly into the text. Romans 12:2 in full. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Most people read that and land on transformed as the main instruction, but Paul is more precise than that. Transformation is not the command, it is the result. The command is the renewing. And the exact difference between those two things changes everything about how you approach this. The Greek word translated transformed is metamorpho. It is where we get the word metamorphosis, total structural change, not a mood shift, not a behavior adjustment, a change at the level of what you fundamentally are. A caterpillar does not decide to become a butterfly through willpower. The transformation happens because of a process working on it from the inside. That is the image Paul is using. The outcome is dramatic, but the outcome is not what you control. What you control is the process, and the process has a name: Anakinosis. Translated renewing. It comes from two Greek roots, ana, meaning again or upward, and kainos, meaning new in quality, not just new in time. This is not novelty. It is not new like a new shirt that will wear out. It is new, like a nature that has been fundamentally upgraded. And crucially, Paul writes it in the present tense. Not, be transformed by a renewal that happened at conversion. Be transformed by a renewing that is happening, continuously, actively, right now, today. Which means, if you have not been actively engaged in the process, the transformation will not be progressing. This is not about earning God's favor. It is about cooperating with a mechanism Paul assumes you understand and are using. Now look at the first half of the verse, because most teaching skips it entirely. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. The Greek word for conform there is suschematizo, to be pressed into a mold from the outside, shaped by external pressure until you take the form of whatever's pushing against you. Paul is setting up a direct contrast between two competing forces acting on your mind simultaneously. The world presses in from the outside. It uses repetition, volume, and constant exposure to shape the way you think about your worth, your safety, your future, what you should fear and want and chase. It does not ask your permission, it just applies pressure until you conform. The renewing of the mind works in the opposite direction. It moves from the inside out. It does not modify your behavior and hope your thinking eventually catches up. It restructures your thinking at the root level, and behavior changes as a natural byproduct. One process is passive. It happens to you whether you engage with it or not. The other is active. It only happens because you choose it, repeatedly, over time. This is the problem most anxious Christians are living inside without realizing it. They are being actively pressed into a mold by everything around them: news, comparison, uncertainty, accumulated disappointment, and they are applying the emergency protocol when what they actually need is to start building something that can hold. Here is where modern science walks into a 2,000-year-old letter and confirms what Paul wrote without the vocabulary to prove. In the 1990s, neuroscientists established something that has since become foundational to how we understand the brain. It is not fixed, it changes, physically, structurally, based on what you repeatedly think, attend to, and practice. They called it neuroplasticity, and it dismantled the previous assumption that the adult brain was essentially hardwired and static. What it showed instead is this: every thought you repeat strengthens the neural pathway that produces it. Every time your mind runs the anxious loop, the worst-case scenario, the imagined catastrophe, the rehearsed fear, that pathway gets faster, more automatic, and harder to interrupt. Your brain is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what brains do. It is becoming more efficient at the pattern you keep feeding it. The anxious mind is not broken, it is well trained in the wrong direction. And here's the part that directly mirrors Paul's language. Neuroplasticity research shows that the way you build a competing pathway is not by fighting the old one. You cannot white-knuckle a neural pathway out of existence. Suppression actually reinforces it. The brain registers the effort and the original thought simultaneously, which strengthens the association. What restructures the brain is repeated, sustained, deliberate attention toward a different input. New pathway. Built through consistency and time. The old one weakens through disuse, not through combat. That is anakinosis. Present tense, continuous, directional. Paul did not have an MRI machine. He had the Holy Spirit and a working understanding of how transformation actually occurs in a human being. The mechanism he describes and the mechanism neuroscience describes are structurally identical. Both require repetition, both require specificity, both require time, and neither of them produces results overnight. This is why anxious Christians who genuinely love God and sincerely apply the Philippians 4 protocol still find themselves back in the same patterns 6 months later. The emergency protocol interrupts the cycle in the moment. It does not automatically dismantle the underlying architecture that keeps generating the cycle. That requires the slower, less dramatic, less immediately satisfying work of anakinosis, which brings the question into sharp focus. Because if renewal is continuous and directional, if it is a process that either is or is not happening right now in your mind, then the most important question is not whether you want to be transformed. Almost every Christian wants that. The question is what your mind is actually being fed every single day, and whether that input is specific enough, repeated enough, and true enough to compete with 20 years of anxious thinking. Because vague spirituality will not rewire a precise neurological pattern, and that is exactly where the practical protocol begins. So let's make this concrete, because renew your mind as a concept is easy to agree with and nearly impossible to act on without specifics. Paul does not leave you with the concept. Romans 12:2 gives you the direction, Philippians 4:8 gives you the filter, and the two verses together form a daily practice that is far more structured than most Christians realize they have access to. 3 steps. Each one non-negotiable, each one drawn directly from the text. Step 1. Identify the pattern. You cannot renew what you have not named. This sounds obvious until you try it, because most anxious thinking operates below the level of conscious language. It runs as a feeling, a low-grade hum, a physical tension you carry before you can articulate what it's actually about. Paul's instruction to bring every thought into captivity in 2 Corinthians 10:5 uses the Greek word aichmalotizo, to take prisoner. A soldier cannot take a prisoner he cannot see. The first act of mind renewal is dragging the specific thought into the light and putting words to it. Not, I feel anxious. That is too broad to work with. The specific thought underneath it. I believe that if this situation does not resolve in the way I need it to, my life will not be okay. That is a sentence you can evaluate against truth. That is something the renewal process can actually engage with. Vague anxiety is hard to treat. A named belief is workable. Step 2. Replace it with specific truth, not general encouragement. Not a verse that sounds comforting. A biblical statement that directly and precisely contradicts the specific lie your anxiety is running. This is where Philippians 4:8 functions as a filter, not a feeling. Paul gives 8 categories. Whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent, worthy of praise. Think about these things. The Greek word for think there is logizomai. It means to calculate, to reason deliberately, to weigh. This is not passive positivity. It is an active, rational, chosen redirection of mental attention toward content that meets a specific standard. Your anxious thought makes a claim about reality. Philippians 4:8 asks, is that claim true? Is it just? Does it hold up under the weight of what God has actually said? If it doesn't meet the filter, it does not get rehearsed. You find the thought that does, the specific, grounded, true statement, and you return to it. Not once. Repeatedly. Under pressure. That repetition is the mechanism. Step 3. Practice it at the moment anxiety peaks, not only during quiet devotional time. This is the step most Christians miss entirely. Renewal practiced only in calm conditions builds a pathway that is only accessible in calm conditions. The brain learns context. If you only redirect your thinking while you're comfortable and undistracted, the anxious pattern retains full control the moment real pressure hits, because that is the only context in which it has been practiced. Jesus did not rehearse surrender in the upper room and then fall apart in Gethsemane. He practiced it under maximum pressure, in real time, with his hands shaking. That is where the pathway was built. That is where Anakinosis became durable. You are not waiting for God to flip a switch in your brain. He already gave you the switch. Romans 12:2 is the instruction manual. The transformation is promised. The renewing is your participation in how it arrives. And here is what changes over time when this process is actually running. Not the absence of anxious thoughts. The recovery time shortens. The pattern still initiates, because you are human and the world still applies pressure. But the gap between the anxious thought and the redirected one gets smaller. Weeks become days. Days become hours. Hours become minutes. The old pathway weakens through disuse. The new one becomes the default. That is not willpower. That is Anakinosis working exactly the way Paul said it would. Here is what nobody tells you about the renewing of the mind. The goal is not a mind that never produces anxious thoughts. That is not the promise, and chasing it will exhaust you. The goal is a mind that knows exactly what to do the moment an anxious thought arrives. Speed of response. Accuracy of redirection. Confidence in the truth you are redirecting toward. That is what Anakinosis builds over time. Not a thought-free mind, but a trained one. And a trained mind changes how you move through the world. Not because circumstances become easier, because your default response to hard circumstances stops being panic and starts being practice. The protocol runs faster, the recovery shortens. The anxious thought still shows up, but it no longer has the room it used to have because something else has been built in that space. That is transformation. Not dramatic, not instant, but real, structural, and permanent in a way that a single emotional experience in a church service never quite manages to be. Paul knew the difference. He wrote Philippians from a Roman prison. He wrote Romans to a church under imperial pressure. He was not describing a theology of comfort. He was describing a battle-tested architecture for a mind that holds under weight. Your mind can hold under weight. Not because you are strong enough, because the renewal process, when it is actually running, builds something stronger than the pressure being applied against it. But there is one category of anxiety that Romans 12:2 and Philippians 4 both assume you have already addressed, and that most Christians quietly haven't. It does not come from circumstances. It does not come from uncertainty. It comes from watching other people receive the exact thing you have been faithfully praying for. And it produces a specific kind of corrosive, faith-eroding thought pattern that neither protocol fully reaches. Jesus addresses it directly in Matthew 6, and what he says there is not what you expect. That is the next video. Don't stop here. Watch this next video to keep growing. If this helped you, like the video and subscribe for more Bible-based truth. Let's reach more souls together. Please share and leave a comment. It's time for us to get out there and grow in faith, walk in truth, and live in light. God bless.